Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the latest in the GLS Masterclass webinar series. Today, we'll be discussing the fascinating subject of how to stand up a legal ops function within your own in-house legal department. Um, Today's speaker being Matthew Glynn, Chairman of GLS and one of the leading experts in legal operations in the world. So before we get going, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Firstly, can you please just make sure that you are on mute throughout the presentation so that it doesn't disrupt the presentation itself. If you do have any questions, there will be a Q&A section at the end of the presentation, but feel free to send through your questions using the chat function as and when those questions arise. We will then get Matt to answer all of those questions in a single batch at the end of the presentation. Final point is that this presentation is being recorded, and a recording will be published on the GLS website for review within the next 24 hours. So please be aware that you are being recorded, and please do feel free to pass on the link to the recording to any colleagues of yours who you think might be interested in today's subject, but who weren't able to attend. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone, depending on where in the world you are located. It's a great topic today. One of the questions that we wrestle with our clients with so often is how to effectively stand up the legal operations function, particularly in your modern day corporate ecosystem where there are so many competing initiatives all struggling to get the limited attention that the workforce can offer. So today we're hoping to really unpack some of the secrets associated with how to effectively stand up your legal ops function. And we're going to do this by way of a tour of the following. We're going to start off with a quick examination of the case for legal operations-led transformation of your typical in-house legal team. After exploring that, we're going to look at what we think is a practical and accessible view of what the legal ops function agenda actually looks like. All right. We're then going to talk about some of the approaches that have typically been taken to resourcing a legal operations team, and we're going to examine the issue of difficulties and challenges associated with getting support for your legal operations agenda. As part of the session, we did want to spend a little bit of time dispelling some of the myths typically associated with legal ops, and then examine some of the common mistakes that have typically and frequently arise in terms of getting legal operations agendas up and running. And as always, we want to finish on a positive note and really tease out and emphasize what we see as being recurring conditions, recurring factors that actually drive the success of an effective legal operations agenda. And then we'll pull it all together with some conclusions that you can mull on, consider at your own leisure. One sort of headline comment that I want to offer before we jump into the agenda is that these are extrapolations from over a decade of us doing this. That said, there is no one size fits all, right? Every ecosystem's different. The resources available to each legal department differs from budgets through to, more importantly, the willingness or support that you can expect from key stakeholders. So the idea is really to share with you some North Stars that can help shape your thinking, and then the hard work really comes back down to you with that internal ecosystem expertise knowledge that you have. Final thing, just before we jump into it, I am just recovering from a little bit of a flu, so if I cough and splutter my way through this, please bear with me, but I'll try and place myself in mute to avoid making it uncomfortable for you. Okay, let's jump in. So the case for legal operations is really quite simple, okay? All in-house legal teams are experiencing and will continue experiencing work levels that exceed current production capabilities. Okay, so regardless of the size of your team, whether you're one lawyer or whether you're 100 lawyers, all in-house legal teams will have to stand up a legal operations competency either now or in the very near future. Why am I so confident in that statement? Well, here are a few observations which I think amount to irrefutable facts. Okay. Firstly, most legal teams are in catch-up mode. Few, if any, have the resources they need to do everything that needs to be done, particularly at the level the business increasingly requires it to be done. That's factor one. Factor two, internal dynamics within your average corporate realm are a constant in the sense that they are eternally dynamic. New corporate priorities come through, new products, new markets, new sort of collaborations are expected. And what this frequently requires is a responsive or reactive gear change from the legal department to support, to enable, to generally execute. External dynamics are also an ever-present. We operate in an environment where there are increasing numbers of new laws. There's new approaches to old laws. Typically, laws lag the technology that businesses increasingly rely on. And similarly, there are new technologies that can be implemented and incorporated into the internal legal environment, which again requires another in-house gear change. Normalization is another factor. What was once a new practice or a new system adopted by a very few teams becomes a staple for all. For example, few currently use AI contract review tools or contract automation, automations as a regular part of their day, but soon it's going to be as prevalent as communicating on WhatsApp. Just to round this out, sort of more existentially, technology is definitely moving into certain aspects of traditional in-house practice, allowing the in-house lawyer to migrate to a higher value role, or as we frequently hear it, upgrading to a more qualitative form of problem that needs to be resolved. And all of this is great news for those that are willing to adapt. So the case for legal operations, if we were to put it onto a very simple diagram, your legal operations agenda really is pretty simple. Your team needs to decide where on the overall performance spectrum do you intend or do you desire to operate. Now, the reality is that most in-house teams currently, and this might be controversial for some because we all believe that we do a great job, but the reality is that most in-house legal teams are sort of operating somewhere in the border between the team breaking down and to the team just surviving. In most cases, the most basic maintenance requirements of legal teams are frequently be ignored. Some examples, Matt, please, I hear you say. Okay, well, legal template libraries, precedents not being maintained on a constant basis, inadequate approach to staff training, poor career development infrastructure for team members, a lack of access to basic support tools. Now, just imagine, if you will, if you were a builder and you didn't maintain your machinery, well, they would break down and you'd be out of business pretty quickly. Most legal teams are not engaging in the most basic of legal department asset maintenance, which is kind of ridiculous given how much lawyers actually cost. We're frequently amongst the most highly paid people inside our organizations. So what we're actually seeing, right, as a manifestation of where I think most teams are at, is that we are seeing record levels of exit from the in-house profession. We're seeing increased levels of churn rate as in-house lawyers move from one company to the next in search of something more satisfying. To my mind, these are all clear signs that all too often, for whatever the reasons are, and there are lots of legitimate reasons that we're going to unpack, that the basics in terms of what an in-house team needs to avoid breakdown, survive, let alone thrive, are not being met. Let's add a little bit more color, right, to those overarching statements. Our work shows that most in-house teams, because of the chronic resource stretch that they face, are operating in a distracted sort of focus mode. 70% of their time is actually being spent in this sort of low value grind zone. Around 20% is spent on truly strategic sort of revenue-based projects, and then around 10% is spent on the unknown. You know, this year's GDPR, this year's Sarbanes-Oxley, this year's data incident response that we have to deal with. And the result is that available budgets are being redlined, the time available to the in-house team is being redlined, the resources that the team need to keep afloat are not there, the skill set that they need to access is not where it needs to be, and morale tends to be quite low. So what do we need to do? What does the in-house function need to do, and how can legal operations help? Well, they need to engage in a legal ops-led transformation whereby they achieve an optimal or an enhanced IHL in-house legal focus. Okay, this is what the business requires. They want to see the in-house adding more value, not being a cost center, but being a value creator. So ideally, an in-house team needs to achieve a sort of a minimal amount of their 50% of their time focused on driving revenue and strategic type projects. And whilst the business as usual grind of your average in-house team necessarily will continue to expand, the way in which the teams can tackle that as a percentage of their overall time needs to be compressed down to around 25%. Now, given all the sort of external, internal dynamics that can drive X factor projects, more capacity needs to be achieved, released to address those types of projects. But how do we achieve this? Okay, that's the million-dollar question. How do we achieve this enhanced focus such that we're leaning less in onto our budget, less of our time is going to things that are important, and we're accessing the resources and skills that we need that ultimately create a more optimal environment? Well, this is where legal operations-led transformation comes in. The million-dollar question, but how can we achieve that transformation when our budgets are limited? How can we achieve this transformation when we have limited time? We don't necessarily have a plan. There might be technology limitations inside our ecosystem. There might have been past failures. Well, the answer, as I say, lies in standing up a legal operations-led transformation program. It's about achieving change with the existing resource sets that you have. It's about new working practices, optimized leverage of existing resource categories, and better use of available budgets to drive productivity. In short, legal teams must stop using, if I give an example, 40 men in the field with shovels when they can hire a tractor for 30 minutes. Legal teams must stop answering the same questions when they can establish an internal client self-service kiosk for FAQs. Legal teams must stop accepting bottlenecks or becoming bottlenecks of vital organizational knowledge from existing and making that knowledge more accessible to the business, whether it's through checklists and playbooks and the like. Legal teams must stop resourcing assignments based on whoever asked for the work to be done first, or even worse, doing the work for the person that's more important, and lean in and rely on work type SLAs that can create more resourcing flexibility. Okay, first in, first out resourcing is carcinogenic. Legal teams need to stop hoping that their personal relationships with the board drives the perception of value being created by the team, and rely on hard data showing how legal is contributing to the overall realization of corporate goals. And critically, legal teams must stop begging for resources and start justifying requests with hard data showing, one, the costs of inaction, and two, the return on investment that decisive resourcing can actually achieve. So, what does the legal ops agenda look like? Let's explore what a typical legal function agenda and mandate looks like. And I say typical with emphasis because most of the headlines, legal operations headlines, seem to be dominated by organizations like Clock, which really are an amalgamation of the largest organizations in the world, and therefore offer an atypical legal operations community experience as compared to what most in-house teams look like. So the legal operations agenda. An effective legal operations agenda is really no more complicated than a competency that's designed to help your legal team improve the productivity yield from each and every available legal department resource category in a prioritized and verifiable manner. Now, some of you will say, as I've I've forecasted just a moment ago, well, I saw something different on the Clock website. You know, they're speaking about 12 legal operations competencies. Yep, sure. If you're a Google or a VMware with vast resources and you're able to hire in huge teams to specialize in each of these 12 corporate areas, including information governance and financial management, yes, maybe that's a version of legal ops that you can stand up and pursue. But this is not the realistic outlook for 99% of in-house legal teams who don't have access to such resources. Our definition offers your legal team, no matter how well resourced you are, the opportunity to engage with legal operations principles and competencies to achieve best case outcomes that are context appropriate. The legal operations agenda that we recommend to you that you attempt to stand up are based around the following key principles. Firstly, resource identification. The key principle for legal operations stand up, if you're to be successful, is to start with what you have, okay? And most organizations overlook the full spectrum of resources that are currently available to it. If you had SharePoint, it's an incredibly powerful in-house legal team resource that could be put to work. Resource optimization. Once you've identified the resources you have, you need to come up with clear strategies to make it work harder. Prioritize resourcing outcomes. You can't do everything with what you've got, so you need to do the things that are most important. And what is most important? Well, sometimes it's the thing that just needs to be done, but in many cases, it's the thing that can be seen to be done, because if you can produce results, you can win support for your agenda going forward. Data-based informed decision-making and performance validation. You need to be speaking the business of language. You need to understand this from the moment you decide to set up your legal ops function. Continuous improvement. The function that you're setting up is an always-on function. And then finally, I mean, there are lots of levels of granularity we can go down to in unpacking these key principles, but your legal operations agenda must, if it is to succeed, always be aligned with and congruent to the actual workloads that your in-house lawyers are required to deliver if it's to be sustainable. Okay, so how do we get that legal department humming? Okay, let's add a little bit more color to what a legal operations agenda actually looks like. Let me give you an analogy. I assume that everybody on this call drives a car. If you don't, apologies, but most people do. You probably feel like you have a pretty good grasp on how your car handles. You know how fast it accelerates, you know how it handles in corners, you know how quickly it stops, you even know how much luggage you can fit in the boot. You might even say that you know your car quite intimately. Well, if you were to pop the bonnet of your car and tell me what you see, what would you see? What are all those pipes, tubes, and parts, and etc.? If you are like me, you'll have absolutely no idea what you're looking at. Why do I offer this analogy? Well, the same applies to in-house leadership. Most in-house leaders feel like they know what their legal team can do. They know them intimately, but almost none of them have a full understanding of what's underneath the legal team's bonnet, as it were. And this is what legal ops is really about. It's about recognizing you can't just work in the machine, you must work on the machine. And you do so to, one, avoid the breakdown on the left end of the spectrum that we shared, and you optimize everything to work towards peak performance. So let's take a quick look at what lies under the legal department bonnet, as because ultimately in the fullness of time, your legal operations agenda is about making each of these individual components, firstly maintaining to make sure they don't break down, then secondly optimizing their performance so the overall performance capability of your car/legal team achieves optimal performance state. So hopefully this transition on the slide will work without any issues. If you go onto the GLS Legal Operations Center, as I hope most of you are familiar with, what you will find is an interactive online tool that breaks down the performance of your typical in-house legal function into 15 core or critical functions, sampling a few: contracting function, legal technology, service providers, human capital, that's our people, and disputes. Now, under the bonnet of each of these functions is almost like a tube map. Okay, we have a line and then stations. Each of these stations we refer to as critical resource enablers, and each function to perform needs to have each of these CREs performing not only optimally individually, but optimally collectively. And this is the role of legal ops. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'm just highlighting the science that will sit behind the actual legal operations agenda. We're talking about boosting profitability. Well, how do you do that? Well, you make sure everything that you got works. So I commend to you this tool so that you can have a look at all these 15 different critical functions, and you can pop the hood on them and see all of the different elements that exist, knowing that you need to establish what kind of condition these CREs are inside your organization and come up with strategies to help perform them. Okay, so that's just a small example of the depth and level of detail of the legal ops agenda. It's designed to pop the hood on the legal team, right, and make things work, starting with avoiding breakdowns and then moving towards peak performance. Okay, let's get back into the slides. 1 second, here we go. Nick, can I confirm that you are now seeing the slides?
Confirmed.
Perfect, thank you. So in order to get your legal department humming, right, you need to be across all the critical functions, and you will now know certainly what our view is, and you need to use those as a North Star, right, in terms of what an optimized in-house legal function looks like. And the interactive tube map will give you a great reference tool to undertake that exercise. Okay, so the 4 stages. Now, this presentation is not so much about how to transform your team, but how to establish your ability to transform. However, it is noteworthy and also reassuring to know that legal ops-led transformation, whether it's for the entire department, as I've just projected, or an individual function, or an individual individual CRE, is precisely the same. It always follows the 4 same steps. And those steps are: number 1, current state audit, an honest, no holes barred assessment of where you're at. Think of this as a diagnostic phase. And as you'll see in about 15 minutes from now, a failure to undertake this step is one of the most significant causes of a failed attempt to stand up your legal ops function. Stage 2, benchmarking. You need to understand what your current state stacks up against what is possible, and by reference to peer legal departments. And this, we know, it can be really hard information for you to get, and that's why you must be, in our view, an active member of the GLS legal operations community, because we routinely share this information. Stage 3 is always solution design, where you take your benchmark wish list and you temper it against the reality of your. I think there's someone not on mute. Nick, could you kill everybody on, putting everyone on mute for us?
Sure.
Yep. It's critical that you adapt your wish list against the realities of your organization. You know, how much change management capacity can you expect? How much budget can you expect? How much time can you expect? And then implementation is the final and 4th stage, and it's always the same if you are to succeed. It's incremental. It's small steps taken consistently. It's modular. Nothing that you do in the legal operations space should involve a big bang implementation or an implementation of anything that you can't roll back inside of weeks. Okay, and it has to be success-based. Nothing you do in legal ops should be implemented unless you know that you are above 98% chance of being successful. Now, we can run an entire day-long masterclass on each of these 4 stages. But for now, let's stay close to the standing up theme and give a quick plug as to why legal operations, certainly to my mind, is one of the most exciting vocational opportunities that we have inside the legal operations. Let's look at why legal ops presents such a awesome opportunity for career. So for sure, legal operations does offer an enticing career outlook for those that are brave enough, smart enough, brave and smart, I think you probably have to be both, to engage in. Why do I say that? Well, law has never really been filled with much meaning. We're not exactly digging wells in Africa with what we do, but legal operations is a chance to work in a impactful environment. So legal operations really are at the forefront of driving innovation and continuous improvement inside legal departments. And given that we operate in, and please no one take offense to this, but this is the reality, the legal industry, whether you're in private practice or in-house, has been carrying almost egregious levels of systemic inefficiency. It's one of the very few professions where change has been so actively and passionately resisted. So there's an opportunity for high impact, make change, but it's a very receptive area to change. Cross-functional collaboration, legal ops leadership are collaborating across the entire organization, finance, IT, procurement. It gives you an incredible opportunity to gain exposure to all areas of your business and develop valuable interdisciplinary skills. Career growth and opportunities. Legal operations is really beginning to gain significant momentum, and those that can demonstrate actual success at effectively implementing transformative change, just they enjoy an altogether spectacularly different career trajectory and highly sought after. I'm going to share some data figures with you in terms of globally how many genuine legitimate legal operations directors there are globally. Leadership ready, okay, it's a lovely segue into more mainstream management. And job security, in-house lawyers with expertise in legal operations are in high demand, and organizations recognize the value of optimizing your legal ops function. I'm kind of banging the drum, right? We want to see people, more people get involved in legal operations because there's a chronic shortage of people that are genuinely good at it. But there is really positive career experiences and alternatives that are available in that space. Okay, let's have a look quickly, because it's all about standing up a legal operations functions. What are the 3 most common models for resourcing a legal operations function? Okay, so there are 3, and they broadly break down as follows. Some teams will start their foray by appointing a paralegal or a secretary. Others will ask a legal team member to move into the role. And the bigger organizations, of which I do not think offer a particularly attractive blueprint of success to follow, will deploy on day one professional legal ops teams. Each resourcing model has its pros and cons. Let's have a look at the paralegal and secretary model. Some obvious pros are that they know the business. They're low cost, they're scalable. You can add admin and secretarial capacity relatively easy. Another pro is that a good portion of, and it's a very important part of legal ops, is administrative in nature, collecting those KPIs and running various reports, right? And I'm not being disparaging, it's an important part of the role, but it's not something that you want to have an expensive lawyer doing, okay? Or even a legal ops director. Talent development. The better organizations out there are actively cultivating organic talent. So to be able to create new opportunities is a great pro. Cons, though, there are significant cons. If you try and take a paralegal or a secretary and move them into a legal ops function leadership role, the reality is that the attendant power dynamics that exist inside legal and inside corporate are such that it very rarely works out, if ever. Okay, lawyers are a peculiarly difficult species. They only like to be led by people that have been at the top of their game. That's the same game that they're in. Okay. There's a limited contribution scope, right? It's a vastly diverse skill set needed to bring up an optimally performing legal operations function, and genuinely, most of the time, that skill set is a little bit beyond reach for secretarial or paralegal. They lack expertise in foundational CRE. So just to a little bit of GLS lexicon there, the foundational CRE would be, say, if you're optimizing your contract function, the first thing you've got to do is have a contracting policy. What's the ceiling and what's the floor, and how far left and how far right can we go on specific issues that we have to negotiate in our contracts. That kind of content, that kind of formative asset, which has to be done on day one, right, can only come from ideally lawyers. Let's go to a different resourcing model. So legal team members. Now, there are some clear pros around this. In-house lawyers that move into legal ops certainly have the ability to make a great contribution to CRE. They make strong project roles, managers. They do sit higher up on the totem pole of hierarchy inside the organization, maybe not always as high up as we would like. Generally, in-house lawyers are quite smart. They are phenomenally effective at acquiring new skills, and it's a great opportunity for role diversification. The cons, and these cons are unfortunately quite significant, is cost. And I've said cost 3 times, so cost. The moment that you put an expensive in-house lawyer, right, on an in-house lawyer salary into a legal ops role, the expectations of return on investment have to be appropriate and commensurate. Okay? On day one, an in-house lawyer is going to have a limited skill set. Quite often, for many of the roles inside the legal operations function, they're just simply overqualified. The reality of a busy in-house environment is that even though they might be tasked to set up a legal operations function, because they are lawyers, because they're good people, they can frequently be pulled out of the legal operations job and put back onto work. That happens very, very frequently. So they're frequently poached to backfill capacity inside of the legal team. Power dynamics web as well. Now, whilst their position in the overall scheme of the totem pole of hierarchy might be high, it still can be a problem that they are so that the leadership, they perform a leadership function, that they are so closely aligned with the existing legal function leadership. Cost and reprogramming, reskilling that in-house lawyer, it just means that it's harder to get return on investment. It's not to say that it can't work. It can work, right? And in many cases, it has to work. And again, I promise to talk about some data points around the actual number of qualified legal ops people out there. So I'm going to come with some very specific recommendations onto how you use this category of resource. And then finally, you have a professional legal operations teams. Now, the pros are obviously that you get in the skill sets that you need. It could be information governance, data analysts, legal technology, knowledge management, professional development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those skills can be brought in at a cost appropriate level. Not everybody has to be on the same level of remuneration as an in-house lawyer or a legal ops director. You get the experience. You get a team that is assembled based on, ideally, a track record of innovation and efficiency in the legal department space. They are practitioners of the business of law as opposed to the art of law that most in-house lawyers tend to feel more of an affinity towards. Now, the cons for this approach are that there are very few specialists out there. Professional service snobbery. Right? The reality is that most in-house lawyers are not going to accept leadership from somebody that hasn't themselves been an in-house lawyer and achieved greatness in that space. Okay, these professional legal ops teams can, in certain circumstances, be perceived as a threat, particularly when the legal ops function is being initiated at the behest of finance or the chief operating officer as part of organizational-wide rationalization and productivity initiatives. Lack of foundational CRE experience, right? So that's the ability to write those contracting policies or the delegations of authority that ultimately will equip the CLMS system that you use to amplify the performance capabilities of your contracting function. key point there is that any legal ops team will have to and necessarily include participation from some in-house team members. They also may be misplaced on the totem pole. Now, what do I mean by that? If a legal operations team is the inspiration of a finance team, then they'll owe their allegiances to that, and they will usually come in with too much of a cost trimming focus, as opposed to how do we create value to demonstrate our contribution. It's probably just worth sharing that some of the largest organizations out there, what do the resourcing of their legal ops functions look like? Well, they might have a legal operations director responsible for overall function oversight. They can have process improvement specialists, technology specialists, data analytics analysts, financing, budget, vendor management experts, training and development coordinators, project managers, as well as admin staff. The point that I want to make here, because hopefully most of you, as I would expect, are saying, well, that's not going to happen at our organization. The legal ops functions that you see at these large MNCs, most of which are from that community, the clock organization came forth, but it doesn't offer a realistic view as to how a legal operations function is going to be stood up for your ordinary teams, okay? The reality is that your approach to legal operations for 99% of in-house legal teams is going to be based around a glide path courtship, and I'll put some color on that in the next slide or two. Most teams are going to transition into legal ops by sort of borrowing and stealing, and just generally being pretty smart about it. The typical team size of a legal operations function will, for most, never achieve more than half a head count, up to 3 at most, and that's for most. And the most common model of standing up a legal operations team is that the majority of teams start with a hybrid of model 1, so the PA secretary together with contributions from model 2, where you have willing and excited and brave and ambitious in-house lawyers that move into this competency. The key, though, is that, well, the key point we're making here is that this is about context adjustment. A lot of the literature you might see from the ACCs and the clock is all based around legal ops at the MNC, which for most of us is about as credible as hearing from Prince Charles on how someone can live on £50 a week. Okay, it's not plausible. Okay, so how do we get support for our legal operations agenda? And we're going to explore two sides of the coin. Firstly, it's why is it so hard? Okay, well, setting up your legal ops function can, and in most cases, is a difficult process. Indeed, most attempts to set up a legal ops function tends to struggle to get going. And in almost all cases, the rate at which progress is achieved tends to be somewhat disappointing for all concerned. And it's usually not a case of having the wrong people or the effort not being put in. The challenges that typically make it difficult to stand up your legal ops function, and in no particular order here, is really a lack of understanding. Okay, a lack of understanding by core stakeholders, the board, the owners of the business, but most frequently, the in-house leader themselves. And it typically takes around 3 years to explain to corporate leadership why legal ops is important. And as I say, the first stakeholder who has to be convinced is actually the legal team leader themselves. And that can pose a huge amount of personal risk for them, because they are, after all, the people that have allowed the legal team to operate in a particular place. So you need a certain amount of courage to say, actually, you know what, we need to do things differently. And there shouldn't be any notion of, well, the team is not performing as well as it could be because of my leadership, because so much has happened. Okay, we've got new working practices that have emerged just relatively recently, new technologies that are available to support that have only just come around relatively recently. And most in-house leaders are just so gosh darn busy dealing with what the business asked them to deal with, that finding time and space to step back to come up with strategies to become less busy, it's just not necessarily possible. So the point is that, you know, education is required, but also, you know, being able to bite down and swallow on any notion that exploring this as a way of improving performance is in somehow a negative for the in-house leadership. Resourcing, we've touched on that. Obviously, it's a challenge, and as we've seen, each model has its clear pros and cons. And in most cases, the cons, if you just went for one version of resourcing model, can be really quite debilitating. Institutional inertia, we touched on this at the top of our session. Corporate environments are typically congested with competing internal initiatives. It can be really hard to get support to stand up your legal operations agenda because there's so many different things trying to be stood up at the same time. Failure to undertake a current audit is always problematic, okay? Without it, efficient and potent transformation initiatives can be extremely difficult to highlight, right, and pinpoint and jump on. Like we've already said, legal ops needs to focus on things that are 98% plus likely to succeed, and hard data gives you the insights needed to work out what that is. And hard data showing that you were performing at 2 and now you're performing at an 8 is what requires to drive the sustainability of enthusiasm for your initiative. Mindsets. Despite the in-house community so regularly screaming for change, at its heart, the in-house community remains very much as conservative and in many respects stuck in the mud as private practice. Now, that's not meant to be inflammatory. It's just that we're in a risk-based, risk-averse profession. Most of us come from private practice where, you know, we have to lock the door 17 times to avoid that our PI policy being called upon, and we take what we know and we then take it into the in-house environment. Fear of displacement is another issue. Key legal department stakeholders can at times fear risk of displacement, and this is a myth that we will dispel pretty shortly. Hierarchy and power dynamics. You know, the traditional hierarchical structure of an in-house team is generally incompatible with performance-based legal operations agenda. Okay, there are so many levels at which a legal ops agenda needs to operate, and it's always about shining light on actual performance and practical suggestions to improve performance. In-house leaders are not really used to operating that way. Cost perception. Legal operations is designed to not necessarily just reduce legal department operating costs, all right? It's designed to increase what can be achieved with all resource categories that you add. And the balance sheet should show that your legal operations costs overall add value substantively and clearly. Siloed landscapes, so internal dynamics might not be conducive to inspired legal operations type cooperation between finance and IT and procurement. Risk aversion we've talked about, but also you know, the myths associated with legal ops, which I think we probably also need to touch on. So how do we dispel, or what are some of the most common myths associated with legal ops, and how do we dispel them? Well, the first one is that legal ops is just for large legal teams. The reality is that every team out there needs a legal operations agenda, most especially the smaller teams where the pressure to leverage up what they can achieve in a very small number of hours available to them each week becomes critical. Another myth is that you need professional legal operations personnel. No, that's not true, okay? This could certainly be the end state, but it is very rarely the first resourcing step that any legal ops agenda will take. The most successful teams adopt a glide path to this end state if indeed it is a context appropriate outcome. Another myth is that legal ops is just about administration. Well, part of an effective legal operations is indeed about administration, collecting those KPIs or analysing workflow demographics from legal service request forms and the like. But it's administration that expensive lawyers should absolutely not be doing. But more than just admin, it involves data-generated insights. It means, it's about innovating. It's about testing and vetting available technologies. It's about just almost every imaginable skill set that you could come up with. Another myth is that legal ops undermines lawyers' authority. Well, not if it's correctly deployed. What it should do is move the lawyers into a more strategically focused role where their contribution to the business is far more demonstrable and working conditions for doing high quality work are better. Another myth is that legal operations threaten job security. Well, to the contrary, it should boost legal team job security because they're now delivering more to the business. Legal ops creates red tape. Well, no, legal operations agendas should eliminate red tape as things become more processed. Delegations of authority start to get built into departmental roles, job descriptions, and also infrastructure such as policies and checklists and workflows. The last couple, legal ops cannot measure ROI. Well, to the contrary, right? Database validation of performance and contributions becomes the norm for your legal operations function. Lawyers are best placed for legal operations. Well, is that a myth? Yes, it is. For some aspects, yes, they definitely are. The development of those CREs, those foundational elements for each of those 15 in-house critical functions, yeah, they need to be developed by the in-house lawyers. No one's better placed. But in many cases, right, and for most cases rather, it's a team game, right? It's not just about lawyers. Lawyers will need to contribute, but other skill sets are required. Now, the final myth is that legal ops is just all about vendor management. If you look at where legal ops is supposedly the most developed, North America, that's actually probably true. Most teams that purport to have a legal ops function, all they do is having cost clerks that manage external vendors and run RFPs for appointment of external providers. But that is most certainly not the typical experience for your average legal ops team for 99% of in-house teams. Okay, so what are some of the common mistakes that people are making as they set up their legal ops agenda? We want to call these out so that you can avoid obvious and known potholes in the road. Okay, common legal mistakes. Here are some of the biggest mistakes that companies typically make when they're setting up the legal ops function. Day one leadership. Using an in-house legal team member, that is retasking someone who is a lawyer on Monday and putting them in as your legal ops lead on a Tuesday can work, but in most cases it is unsuccessful if we talk about unsuccessful being either somewhere on the spectrum from it doesn't work out or it doesn't work out in a time enough that we create the necessary momentum and energy and enthusiasm for moving our legal ops agenda along. The stark reality here is a lawyer on a lawyer's salary, noting all of the cons that we've discussed around this resourcing method, can substantially diminish the success of or your ability to set up a legal ops function in a timely fashion. The analogy that we like to give, it's a little bit like deciding that you're going to grow vast wheat fields to come up with an organic sourdough bread in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia. Yep, for sure, you throw enough resource at it and time, you might be able to deliver, but it's going to be the most costly loaf of bread ever baked, okay? Ingredient input is a very important factor. The disruptor dilemma. How do we get the wolf to collaborate with the sheep? Okay, I need to qualify this comment, right? In many cases, the sort of prevailing culture of the in-house community can be impacted by out of place, out of time leadership. People just aren't familiar with or at that end of their spectrum of their careers where maybe they don't have the appetite for change. So can we really expect an old-fashioned in-house leader to be happy with or engage with or embrace with a legal operations function. Okay, it's just something that needs to be carefully managed. That's one version of this disruptor dilemma. The second version is that if the chief operating officer or the CFO thrust the legal operations agenda into or onto the legal team, how do we expect those two parties to collaborate where one is perceived as a threat? This will give rise to a very important qualification in terms of success factors in a few minutes. I just want to reiterate, we're not saying that in-house lawyers should not and cannot play an important role. Indeed, they absolutely must, okay? But it's better that their contribution comes in the form of a team that initiates the move towards demonstrating what a legal operations team can be done, where they can contribution around the edges of their day job and build support and traction for that agenda, as opposed to the overall performance pressure that comes with, on Monday you were an in-house lawyer, on Tuesday now you're running the legal ops function. I've talked about this one, failure to audit the current state. Now, not having a database view of your current state is fatal. It makes it so much harder to work out where to focus on to achieve quick wins, to work out the correct sequencing of your efforts for your legal ops initiative, and it doesn't give you a chance to demonstrate your results to continue earning the support of your ecosystem. Similarly, failure to benchmark, okay? Not understanding how you stack up against what is possible frequently means that your legal operations initiative is running blind, okay? Put simply, you need to know what peer departments are doing. You need to know what legal solutions or what legal department solutions or resources or working practices are out there so that you can decide what you need. This is one of the things that we're most pleased about in terms of our GLS legal operations community. We're bringing the insights of 23,500 lawyers to you in one place. So if you haven't been on to the platform of late, please do go in and check in the Knowledge Centre. It's got a phenomenal amount of resources. Tech-led changes. Standing up a legal function is not about doing a CLMS implementation on day one. In fact, that is a guaranteed one-way ticket to failure. Okay, a focus on legal tech transformation, where you use a big CLMS type implementation to deliver or answer all the challenges that you think you have, enjoys a 90% failure rate. Bad faith, or sorry, unrealistic expectations. Unrealistic expectations around what a legal ops function can deliver can be a very heavy weight for that initiative to carry. And it compounds when your day one leadership is someone who's on an expensive in-house lawyer salary. The expectations become somewhat unfairly inflated. Although when I say unfairly, there will be those inside the organization that's saying in the current climate, every resource is expected to deliver a return on investment. So it can place, a target on your back. The role of bad faith internal actors is actually a real thing. Okay, and we've touched on it in a couple of parts of the presentation thus far. In reality, bad faith internal actors can actively frustrate the legal operations agenda. That long in the tooth in-house leader who refuses to change or sort of passively aggressively embraces a legal operations function and then frustrates every initiative that you try and put in place. It can happen. Traditional turf wars between, say, finance and legal can also be an issue as departments vie for or engage in turf wars over domain authority. Legal operations, as I say, necessarily is multidisciplinary. That's how it's going to work. So it relies heavily on good cooperation, in which most cases needs to be earned. If your ecosystem doesn't enjoy that historically, that can be a really strong indicator that you're going to find yourself on a steep and slippery incline. Lack of data metrics. Again, we've talked about this, but it's not just the current state data metrics that you build up, but it's ongoing metrics to show your progress. And a failure to invest in this when you stand up your legal operations function is critical. It's critical, and it's an opportunity gone missing. Because of the levels of inefficiency, right, getting a current status score of 2 out of 10 is actually a great result, because with a minimal amount of effort, you can bring that up to 7s, 8s, 9s, etc. So it's vital as you stand up your legal operations efficiency that you have at least a rudimentary and basic data analytics program supporting what you're doing. Cost reduction emphasis. If this is unduly weighted in favor of what cost reductions can be achieved, then the program is going to struggle to survive. Now, legal ops is not about saving dollars across the board. It's actually about maximizing what every resource category, including budgets, what they can deliver to the business. Okay. No one in their right mind is ever going to agree that if you had a budget of 500,000 this year, you were so efficient it only spent 300,000 next year, so that the year after you only need 300,000. It doesn't work like that. You will never be able to increase your budget. So what you need to do is to show the business the value, the enhanced value that you can achieve with that same level of budget. Having said that, there are certain resource categories inside or on the balance sheet, on the budget for an in-house legal team, that should enjoy compression. One of the most obvious ones is money spent on external providers. As you build the internal competency and the capacity and the production capabilities of your in-house team, in most cases, what you need to spend with external providers reduces. And as you get better at performance managing your external providers, for example, you put in place guidelines for external vendors and what kind of efficiencies you expect and cost and billing protocols and the like, even the same volumes of work that you've traditionally briefed should result in smaller bills. Okay, so these are some of the common mistakes. Let's now sort of, as we enter the home straight on this session, and we'll look to get you out just shortly after the hour, what are some of the more positive drivers of success for legal operations? Okay, the first part of this is what I call the boring blah, 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 blah stuff, okay? Most people, most consultants are going to come in and say, okay, well, what you need is clear leadership and vision, a well-articulated vision, and senior management support. We need to secure buy-in, aligned objectives with the business, cross-functional, whatever. Yawn, as I say. Yes, these things are important, okay, but they can't become the focus of a successful legal operations agenda. What will make your legal ops stand up more effectively is a regular series of action-orientated outcomes that are proved successful. So the real principles for success, and this slide is probably the most important distillation of over a decade of successful legal team transformation, legal ops-led transformation findings. These are the principles that matter, okay? Number one, powerful first steps. You must deliver tangible results quickly. You need to plan and focus all your efforts on quick wins to get things moving. Think of the flywheel effect. Now, those first few turns of the wheel are impossibly difficult, but it gets easier. But if you have a series of quick wins, meaningful wins, wins that you know you're going to be guaranteed to succeed, then you will build momentum. You have to avoid anything that's not a shoe into success. Okay, for goodness sake, if you're going into legal operations, just forget about those AI contract review toolkits, forget about that CLMS solution, forget about anything that plugs into a wall, okay, or requires a license. Not in year one. If you fail on those time-consuming black hole projects, you will lose support for your legal ops function. You've got to avoid aggressive timelines like the plague. A lot can be achieved in 36 months. It's a realistic timeline for a substantial improvement of the performance of the in-house legal team. It's an adequate window to build a mature legal operations function, okay? What you do in year one is all about building your credibility for the tough stuff, okay? You've got to remember that. Tone down the ticket size, tone down the user impact of things that you want to do in year one, and focus on the slam dunks. Take care of the low tech. first. It's potent, it's cheap, it's low risk. Technology is any tool that can boost the level of productivity per unit of effort. It's a whiteboard and a whiteboard marker. It's a checklist. And yes, of course, it includes AI-based review solutions, but take care of the low tech first. It's easy, it's cheap, it's safe to produce, and it's high impact. And by the way, small detail, if you haven't taken care of your low tech first, if you haven't done your checklists, your playbooks, your clause banks, how are you going to put them into your CLMS system? You can't and you won't. This is a really important point, okay? Keep transformation linked closely to the type of work that the in-house legal team is required to do, okay? Don't go off and start working on a diversity and inclusion initiative. Focus on something that's going to improve the highest volume contract that your legal team is required to service. Focus on the most frequently asked questions that are directed at your legal team, okay? If you are going to, and this will become one of my key recommendations in conclusion, that you glide path in to establishing your legal functions where a certain level of capacity of your in-house team is allocated to transformation. If it can be aligned to the work that they actually have to do for the internal client, it will become far more sustainable. The rationale and logic for the investing in a portion of time, and I'll give you some guidance on that in a minute, will be there, okay? To deliver transformation in 36 months, your team must observe, every member of your legal team must observe the 85-15 rule, okay? 85% of your in-house legal team must at any point in time be devoted to the client work, but 15% must be devoted to how we improve our approach to the client work. 15% of every in-house lawyer's time must be devoted to a legal operations task, usually, right, putting in place those foundational key critical resource elements which you'll find on the interactive tube map. Maintaining the alignment and congruence between what your in-house lawyer does by way of contribution to helping standing up your legal ops agenda and the workflow will drive sustainability. Pre-mobilization activity, you need to secure interest and buy-in well before you launch your program, right? And usually that's in the form of asking the business what they need from the legal team. Get data from the business so that anything that you ask for, any sponsorship and support that you need is not, here's my great idea, it's here's what the business asked for us to deliver and here's my ideas on how to do it. Make the business ask you for what you know the legal team needs. Potholes, right? You've got to proactively avoid known obstacles to transformation, which was the discussion on the previous slide. Obviously, we're giving you the headline observations. There's a little bit more to it, and we'd be happy to share more in detail if you'd like. And then finally, you need to embrace the idea of what we call dynamic adjustment. Just because in January you said you wanted to achieve X by June, doesn't mean it necessarily plans out. We operate in an incredibly dynamic environment, internal, external factors. There's still an element of, being chronically under-resourced. Things can happen. So you must dynamically adjust your goals and your agenda and your implementation strategy by reference to, it could be new technologies, new internal imperatives, new budgets, new priorities, etc. Okay, so what, in our view, is the optimal way to stand up your legal operations function? Again, my introductory comment and caveat is that these are observations that we've gleaned from 10 years of doing this. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but for your average legal team, what's on the screen here is consistently what occurs for those that effectively stand up a legal operations function. It's 3 phases, and the timelines, indicative timelines, are attached. The approach to standing up your legal operations function starts somewhat informally. It's a self-authored initiative by the legal team leadership or by a willing member of the legal team, okay? You mobilize yourself within the in-house legal team. You put in place an 85-15 rule. You do take some personal PA or paralegal support, maybe someone in the team a couple of days a week, and you start directing them at some of the administrative tasks that your legal operations function needs. You conduct a current status assessment. It does not have to be an organization, a department wide. It could be just a function wide, or it could be a key element within a function, but you build up your data. You have your legal team start putting in place those foundational CREs, and effectively over a 6 to 9 month period, you prove your case, not just to the business, but you prove your case to the team, to yourself, that you can make change. 85-15, if you can stick to it, will make you successful. There's no budget. There's no dedicated budget for you at this stage. None. And again, achieving congruence between your 85-15, what your clients ask you to do, and spending a bit of time developing ways of working or support resources that make you more efficient at doing what a client asks you to do, makes the informal stage more likely to succeed. Then we go to a semi-formalization of our legal ops function stage. Again, it remains IHL led, but we start developing very clear year one goals. We start becoming more proactive in terms of building a data validation of, I'm picking on my contract function. Okay, I benchmarked what my contract closure times are or my contract renewal times are, and they were horrendous. Yippee, right? And I implement certain changes, and then I retest the metric, and almost always you will find really positive step change improvements. You start to attract budget, but in many cases it can be from your existing legal team budget. Portion of it gets earmarked to doing things. How can this work? Well, instead of asking your expensive law firm to review an agreement, you spend the resources to develop a template, and from that template you've got 75% of the clauses that you need for every other template, etc. So you're sort of begging and borrowing from yourself in order to address more resources, direct more resources to the initiative. Administrative hire. You continue on with the 85-15, but you start building the case for a permanent administrative hire, and that's a critical role. It might not be the highest on the totem pole, but aggregation, collection, and processing of data is phenomenally important. Even the task of pulling together, PowerPoint slide presentations, distilling those results, right? You can't have expensive lawyers doing those kind of things. Okay, so no formal budget, and it's about diverting some of your budget. And this stage is usually from month 18 to 21. Okay, and then we move ideally within sort of just before a 2-year mark. All going well, we start to formalize the existence of our legal operations function inside the organization. We appoint an appropriate lead. Maybe this is a time where 2 things are possible. One, where we go out to the market and we source a professional legal operations director, unlikely. Or 2, the talent that we've had from our internal team that was brave enough, smart enough to want to pursue a legal operations career have had almost 2 years transitioning to the role. They're fast learners, they've acquired the skills, they sit at the right level of the totem pole, right? They have the internal relationships. Maybe we can promote within. Okay, we come up with permanent resourcing. Now, permanent resourcing doesn't mean somebody working Monday to Friday. It means for more of the levels that we need, maybe someone who can support on analytics, or someone who's got a penchant for reviewing technology solutions. It might be a part-time requirement, etc. But we start formalizing how we resource the different competencies inside our legal operations function. We push ever deeper in terms of our legal operations initiatives, and we add experts as and when we're required. I've got a double little superscript asterisk there. We're not saying for a second that you need to go and hire a data analytics person, a knowledge management person. Again, everything is context specific, but for sure there will be a data analytics work stream and a knowledge management work stream inside your legal ops competency. It doesn't matter whether you've got someone triple or quadruple or quintupling, halving to do that, but you just need to start bringing specific expertise together, however is appropriate for your context. Okay, so a little bit over the time, but it's a big topic. Let's wrap with some conclusions. So our final thoughts really are as follows. There is a universal need for legal teams to embrace legal operations thinking and ideally standing up a legal operations competency. Okay, it's context specific for sure. Your approach to legal operations needs to be contextualized to the environment that you find yourself in. If you can go out and hire, I promised a data point, didn't I? There are probably on planet Earth less than 1,000 genuine legal operations director professionals. Probably more realistically around 400. Most legal operations directors in US MNCs are just responsible for managing vendors, right? They do not have and don't partake in the full spectrum that's required. So it's extremely narrow and shallow talent pool available, okay? So context specific for most is that you're going to have to build these competencies internally, okay? Current state, you absolutely, if you were to be successful, you must build up some data-based insights as to where you're at. It doesn't matter if you get a bad finding. Bad findings are good because you can build upon them, and the building upon them and showing in the business of the language of business data that you're moving forward tends to attract ongoing and sustainable support. Legal ops, in our view, is unquestionably most effectively most likely to succeed if it's self-initiated, if it's self-authored and self-resourced initially. If you've got 400 gazillion lawyers, at some point, yes, you're going to have a dedicated standalone function, maybe managed by or dotted line report into legal director. It doesn't matter what the context might require, but self-initiated, self-authored, and self-resourced initially is most ideally is the optimal way to achieve. The salt effect. Now, when it comes to using your own people, it's like salt, okay? A little bit of salt keeps us in optimal health, right? Maybe that 15% contribution, maybe a glide path approach over a 2-year period from an internal lawyer to becoming a dedicated in-house lead is appropriate. But you put too much salt in too quickly and it can be harmful, okay? Doesn't mean you will die, but it can be extremely harmful, okay? Observe the 85-15 rule. You can't just work in the machine. You have to work on the machine. 15% of every legal team's member, every legal team must be allocated to legal ops led transformation, okay? It's not a job on top of the job, it's part of the job. And if you can maintain alignment between what you ask them to do under the banner of your legal operations function and what's in the box from the clients, right, it becomes a slam dunk investment of time. Obstacles, you know what they are mostly, right? Avoid them. And critically, you yourself don't become one. Part of being successful at legal operations, if you're an in-house leader, is letting go, right? Yes, you're an expert, but you're not an expert in legal technology. You're not an expert in analytics. You're not an expert in change management. You're an expert at managing a legal department, old school, okay? Don't become the obstacle. And enjoy the improved performance. There's absolutely, unquestionably, right, an effective legal operations function can achieve easy performance gains. And if you can do that consistently and stay on the path which we advocate, small, modular, guaranteed to succeed initiatives, observing an 85-15, right, bringing on resources just in time, developing organic talent, right, your function will succeed. By way of next steps, obviously GLS has a lot to help you wherever you are on this journey. The Legal Operations Centre now has 850 odd different resources, so you can take a lawyer or you can take a non-lawyer and the how to develop a legal operations functional. The resources are there. If you needed that proverbial tractor for 30 minutes, there's plenty of tractors on the Legal Operations Centre. Have a look. Most importantly though, The in-house community has always been very successful at taking sensible people who learn a little bit about a new challenge or a new project, and they can get the job done. There is a wealth of information on the Knowledge Centre from our 23,500 member community, right, who themselves are innovating as a matter of survival. Go in and explore the resources. It's all arranged around the 13 conversations that are most important to the in-house community: leadership, future skills, legal ops, etc. And finally, thank you, and continue to participate in the GLS Legal Ops community. It's entirely free to join. For those that actually go on and register for the community, there's a whole worth of additional resources that we make available. That's the end of the session. If we had any Q&A, Nick, I'm just going to check in quickly there. Just let me know whether or not there's any questions and answers that we can give to the team.
Thanks, Matt. That was a really great presentation. We do actually have a couple of quick questions that have come through. The first one was that you've mentioned the 85-15 rule a bit during the presentation. For the uninitiated, could you unpack that rule a bit more and explain exactly what that rule means?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Look, the 85-15 rule is really about acknowledging that we can't just work in the machine. We've got to work on the machine, right? If we didn't service our truck would break down. If we don't take care of our health and wealth, will break down. So, but it also acknowledges that at any one point in time, the in-house legal team members themselves are best placed to undertake much of the work and initiatives that are required to make your legal operations effectively stand up. You know, those contracting policies, it's got to come from the lawyers, right? Those checklists, what do we organizationally want to check before we load it into a CLMS or an AI contract review solution? That needs to come from that. So if we can just take 15% of the time of the in-house lawyer and allocate it to legal ops, but make sure that it remains congruent and aligned with what our internal audience are asking. As an example, you know, if your business is going into an omni-channel marketing structure where all of a sudden influencer agreements are the theme, well, let's get something produced around how to negotiate an influence agreement template, a checklist, and a playbook. Okay, so that's the key thing, is that the best placed people can consistently help drive legal operations initiatives. That's who we need to engage with. Now, sometimes for many of the foundational elements, it's that in-house lawyer, and they have to have a contribution. Just to reiterate, right, working on your machine and not just in your machine, it is your job. Legal ops led transformation is not the job on top of a job. It is the job for all lawyers. And if you think about it, if you don't do that, you're just going to get left behind.
Great, thank you. The next question, probably a very pertinent one, is I am an in-house lawyer. I'm interested in legal ops. Does this mean I have to accept a pay cut?
Well, if you want to go for a job as a legal ops director, and today you're a lawyer and the job starts tomorrow, then potentially. You know, the reality is that depending on where you are on the in-house community, you know, the legal ops director may or may not get paid as much. But let me drill down into that a little bit more. I think that the short answer is no, right? You don't have to take a pay cut. If you transition into legal ops by leveraging the contributions you're best placed to make as an in-house lawyer and move, you know, in a glide path fashion into the role, almost certainly you could end up making far more than the average in-house lawyer, and indeed far more than the average general counsel. Okay, an in-house lawyer that transitions into legal ops, that has the ability to evidence a successful track record of transformative legal operations led change, right? Quantifiably demonstrating that on day one, the value contribution to the business was X, but now it's X to the N. Those people are rainmakers. They're alchemists. And we consistently see that people who are successful leading legal operations functions enjoy altogether different career trajectory. The other thing that I would add, and it's just one of those isms associated with the legal industry. In fact, I was sent to Harvard and they told us about that management of the law firm, it can only ever be a lawyer, which is kind of self-debilitating. It's like you take the most successful lawyer, the rainmaker, and then you ask them to manage, right? Why? Because people follow the winner. But the winner at rainmaking is not necessarily the best manager. Similarly, for legal ops leadership, right, it's the same issue, right? The in-house team will want to be led by one of their own. So one of their own that acquires those skills is in a unique position to actually succeed. So I think if you can transition into a role, you can achieve a sustainable record of success, then there's no question that if you go into legal ops leadership merit-based, then you can have an altogether more dynamic, exciting, and remunerative career. As I said, there really is only, we can say 1,000, but in truth, there's probably only 400 legitimate legal operations directors that are doing everything that needs to be done for a legal team globally. So it's such a small talent pool. So, you're kind of pushing into very, very opportune, a very, very, very opportunistic vocation, in my view. So I'd encourage a lot of people to make the transition, but you need to transition in a glide path fashion would be my recommendation. Nick, I think we're probably, unless we had any more questions, I know that we're running a little bit over
I think we're
time.
a bit over time, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, all right. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone. As per usual, the presentation will be available up on the Legal Operations Centre platform for playback for anyone that wants to review it in due course. But thank you so much for your attention. We do appreciate your ongoing support, and we hope that you found something of value in our time together today.
Thank you, everyone.